4 determined primary and secondary citizenship teachers from around the country head for Ofsted HQ. They've got nearly 30 years of teaching experience between them and a whole lot of questions about the business of inspections. Time to turn the tables on top citizenship inspector Scott Harrison.
We're still in an emerging stage with this subject.
The first issue under inspection is self-evaluation.
In terms of self-evaluation, how is it really going to work for citizenship?
What we've had in the past was a system where people said Ofsted inspection will make a difference because it's a lever on change. Since 2002, everybody's known that when an inspection team comes in, as well as everything else in the school, they're going to be looking at citizenship, and there'll be a citizenship report in your inspection. And that's no longer going to be the case. When an inspection team comes in for your 3-yearly secondary school inspection, they may well touch upon citizenship issues insofar as they'll be looking at some Every Child Matters themes like pupil participation. But broadly they won't be looking at any subject provision at all. In between those inspections, all schools will get periodic visits, perhaps for a secondary school just one between their 3-year inspection, and that might be any subject. If I were in a subject like history and geography, I'd be in a very good position to say, well, I know where I am with this. There's an established culture of what the subject means. For citizenship, it's a bit more difficult because people haven't got so much to evaluate themselves against, which is why things like the department toolkit and talking to other schools and going to training that's available and getting some CPD if they can are all very important, because we're still in an emerging stage with this subject. As the inspectors come in, they are therefore part of that dialogue of how citizenship is developing, rather than having an expectation that everything will be in place, because we're not there yet.
Citizenship is very much for me something that's beyond something that goes on in the classroom. There's an ethos to citizenship, and the whole point of citizenship when it began was, of course, that there was a flexibility in how schools would actually implement it. You could do it through other subjects, you could do it within one subject, you could do it as a discrete subject, and for a school like ours, we're very much excited by the fact that we could do something a bit different, have far more interactive approaches, with an emphasis on pupils actually doing things, and now we're getting what seems to me a criticism in the recent report: there's not enough written work going on. So I'm wondering, really, is that sort of a slight U-turn?
No, not a U-turn. I think the original order allows for communication orally and in writing, and it's been there all the time. I just think that in the excitement of getting children doing things and participating, that sometimes that aspect was neglected. But when people then start to ask us, well, what are the standards in citizenship? We can talk about different sorts of outcomes from participation and so on. But when you look at inquiry and communication, that brings us into the area of literacy. Certainly not worksheets, heaven forbid, but something occasional and substantial where children can show that they have researched something and they can communicate it and teachers can assess it, and it shows that citizenship carries the same status and high expectations as history or geography or anything else.
You do hear fantastic examples of good practice in terms of active citizenship, but one thing that concerns me is that it's an entitlement with the national curriculum for all students. Now, how do schools ensure, if it's done on an ad hoc basis depending on which sort of programmes, activities different children are involved in, how do we ensure that all students get that entitlement to active participation?
It's been something that's worried us from the start. I believe that the order is a good one, with the 3 strands of citizenship which should in a way interrelate. So they've got their knowledge and understanding, their inquiry and their entitlement, as you say, to participate in some way. And some people have been very ambitious in the projects that they've undertaken with work in the community and so on. But in some schools and in some circumstances that's very difficult. So we've tried to find other ways in which we would say, yes, an inspector would be happy to see that that's in the spirit of the order, even though the children haven't left the classroom. And it might be that they're using ICT, for example. It might be that they're just learning about campaigning and they're doing something as a consequence.
So when you're looking at assessment materials, is that going to be covering all 3 strands?
On assessment, we're looking with QCA at how we can develop exemplar materials. And the idea is that we produce materials for different circumstances. So we want to get into the idea of how you assess pupils discussing things. This is quite tough. It's a new area. Drama teachers probably do it very well. Some of the assignments are written. Some of them are practical based in the sense that they involve investigations. And some of them are more classroom based.
You were talking earlier about how to sort of assess participation. Do you video or record any of the children actually working in order that you can go? I know that lots of drama teachers do that so they can assess like GCSE works.
Well, I'm a drama teacher as well, actually, so that's quite helpful. We do video, but what we do is we make notes as we go along when we're watching, for example, a presentation to the council, for example. So we'll have assessment criteria that we can briefly assess against while we're watching.
Would that be useful to, on an inspection, would an inspector ever want to see?
Well, it would be very
video
useful,
evidence,
but I would say don't do it for the inspectors.
No.
Do it if it's worthwhile. Do it to share the standards between the teachers, because that's a good way of giving confidence, especially if you've got non-specialist colleagues. These are the sorts of things that you should be looking for in the way that this person's undertaken a particular presentation or whatever it might be.
One concern I have is it's relatively easy to evaluate knowledge and understanding in terms of a lesson, but how would you actually evaluate the quality of things like participation, especially if it's done outside school with perhaps 1,500 children in your school?
I think that gets to the heart of the matter. It's a matter of whether the pupils believe that they're making a difference and have transferable learning. And I think you can get at that from a conversation. But I wouldn't be doing this in any case for the inspectors. I'd be doing it because you believe that the citizenship skills that they've learned and their understanding of their role as change agents has empowered the pupils in a way that maybe the curriculum in the past doesn't. However you're doing your participation, the best evidence is when the inspector sits down with a group of children and asks them what they've done. And I would say to teachers, don't try and create a great industry of evidence gathering to prove you're doing this, because it's not what it's about.
We actually deliver an integrated course with PSHE and citizenship together. I found myself over the last couple of years of actually perhaps doing a bit less PSHE and increasing the amount of citizenship. I'm wondering if I'm going to have to redress that balance and bring back some of the PSHE.
Many schools had a PSHE slot in the timetable before citizenship came in. But for a school just to say, all right, do citizenship within that time without giving extra time to PSHE was putting a quart into a pint pot. And I don't see why a PSHE time slot should accommodate citizenship as well. Adam's already made the point about the difference between the personal and civic, as you put it, or public dimension of citizenship, which is a nice one. But in fact, there are some schools which have said, all right, we'll leave the PSHE where it is because we see the home of citizenship more in the humanities, for example. There are those schools that have thought that they're doing citizenship when actually what it is really is some reworked aspects of PSHE which don't meet the citizenship order at all. Now in primary, of course, the curriculum there is a little more complicated because it's called PSHE and citizenship, and the citizenship element is really just one quarter of a bigger programme. But as soon as they get across into secondary schools, somehow, as far as I'm concerned, they should be seeing a tangible programme, and the association with PSHE is no longer automatic.
It seems to me that you're saying unless you have citizenship as a discrete subject, your provision is not going to be as good. And I can imagine with schools that have decided they want to have citizenship across the curriculum, they want to sort of set it up as a broad ethos, suddenly now to be told, well actually schools have tried this but 4 years down the line it's not really working, think again. I can imagine that a lot of
You're right to curb my enthusiasm, and what I would say is that I believe you need a core. It might be in some very well placed cross-curricular units. For example, the whole geographer's approach to sustainable development and globalisation might be done from a citizenship viewpoint. The historians might take on what some people would call a political literacy. But we haven't found many good examples of those things working. But if there's no core there, I fear the pack of cards collapses.
from a teacher's point of view as well, I haven't met a school yet who have successfully managed to build in an effective assessment where it's done on a cross-curricular, either because they can't decide whose responsibility assessment is, or they can't actually pull the strands together to get an effective system going and assess, as we keep saying, all three strands, not just knowledge.
I think this raises some questions about whole school decisions. PSHE, it could be alleged, was a convenient place to put citizenship as damage limitation. So does cross-curricular. Let's do an audit and find where it's happening, and let's hope it goes from there. Or you make a hard decision and you say, actually the curriculum is evolving. There is recognition now that this is an important subject in its own right. We want it to take on a new status. We want to set it up properly. So we're going to actually have to change the whole timetable and staffing. And that's the very hard end of introducing a new subject, and some schools are already there. But most of them are somewhere in the middle and are still finding little bits of core and little bits of additional, so that as yet we haven't got an entity. Now, philosophically, some people would say, well, citizenship should be everywhere, and I'd agree with that. But the danger is that very often when you say it's everywhere, you actually find it's nowhere.
What's your opinion in primary? Because obviously it's very different with the timetabling issue.
Yes, it's a different model in primary, of course, but what you've got in the being informed citizens part is still some content knowledge about the media, about democracy and so on, which young people aged in years 4, 5, 6 can indeed come to terms with and get interested in elections, school councils and so on. And I think we sell them short when they don't get those opportunities. But primary schools that have said this is part of our mission are doing it really well.
We were inspected in November 2003, and what I thought was really nice about that was the enthusiasm of the inspectors when they came into lessons and saw what we were doing in terms of citizenship teaching. And I think what they really enjoyed was how kind of actively involved the learners were, and how they really were taking a lot of responsibility for their learning.
I think you've picked on the two key words for me. I think active and responsibility are for me the two key words, because I want pupils, and also want every pupil to be active, not just a small cohort within the group, that they're actually doing something that they're researching themselves that's of interest to them. But I think the other thing that's also important for me in a good citizenship lesson is that they will have that chance to actually evaluate what they've done, discuss things with each other and actually say, well, did this go well?
In terms of self-assessment, they'll feed into that. So there's an element of peer assessment, and so don't forget you were really good when you said that.
They're very encouraging towards each other, aren't they? And they like to highlight the good things that each other do.
If we need to talk to senior management about why we should be doing citizenship, it's just the views of those young people, isn't it?
I think Ofsted stands foursquare behind the development of citizenship. The change in the inspection framework doesn't change things. We've set out what we believe good citizenship teaching curricula participation look like. It's now up to schools to take that forward, and we believe the case for citizenship has been well made, and now with the self-evaluative model of inspection, it's over to you.